Hello, I'm Dave.
And I'm Rob.
We've got the same dad.
And I'm putting on a punk voice for today.
That's a punk voice? It sounds like a soft rock American voice.
I've got the same dad!
I'm Dave. No, that's not fair because they're not from, they're from Guildford, not South London, they're going to say. Okay. We've got the same dad.
We didn't meet until I was 16.
So this is the podcast where
we talk about an album that
your
brother should know.
No! Brilliant.
Oh.
Right on the money. Okay, welcome everybody. Today's album that I'm going to share with my brother Rob is Rattus. Do you know? I don't even know how to pronounce it. That was a good start. Never actually said the words before.
And neither has anybody else, or certainly not anyone that paid money for this album.
Norvegicus. The Latin name for rat, anyway.
Exactly. This is my first issue of the album. Before even listening to it, why is the dumbest music made shrouded in the most pretentious title known to man? Already...
Well, originally it was going to be called Dead on Arrival.
Yeah, which would have been more befitting because maybe it would have proved true and their career would have torpedoed to the ground where it belonged.
So the Stranglers are an enigma, a vicious, snarling enigma. They rose to prominence during the punk era in the late 70s in the UK. But the question mark that always hangs over the Stranglers is, are they punk? Well, they're definitely not now, but were they at the time? They were too old to be punk to start with. Formed by drummer Jet Black.
Rad name,
Jet Black. Well, if you're Chris and Brian Duffy, you're going to change your name, aren't you? And he went with Jet Black. He was ancient. He was almost 40. And a successful local businessman in and around Guildford to boot. So he was like the ice cream van king of Guildford, apparently, and owed an off license. But waited till he was, mid-30s, almost 40, to get back into the music industry. And formed a band around him with JJ or Jean-Jacques Bonnel, an Anglo-French history graduate, also in his mid to late 20s. He played bass, but was a highly trained classical guitarist. Very noisily. Hugh Cornwell, also a mid to late 20s graduate, biochemistry in this case, an accomplished blues player and writer of melodies and pop hooks.
For professionally, he was a professional session musician.
He was just no. He was just knocking around the blues circuit. To finish the lineup of this, pub rock or punk band, yes, Dave Greenfield on keyboards. That's right, keyboards for a punk band. Dave Greenfield was a musician, had tried to have a career in Germany, earned a living apparently as a piano tuner. So there's a piano tuner in a punk band. But of all things,
so we've got a historian, an ice cream van magnate, a non-professional musician, writer of jingles that clearly weren't good enough to get paid for, and
a piano tuner. Yes, a piano tuner who wasn't, as is often thought, influenced by the Doors, but apparently whose favourite keyboardist was Rick Wakeman of Yes. So quite a long way from punk. And apparently they didn't do the punk thing. They didn't hang out with Vivienne Westwood in the Sex Boutique. They didn't dress like punks, as far as they were concerned. Punks were sort of a bit wet, really. Jet Black described the Sex Pistols.
So they're harder than punk.
Oh, they were definitely harder than punk. As far as they was concerned, the Sex Pistols was a comedy act, and they had a pub rock following. They'd been kicking around the pub circuit since the mid-70s, and apparently quite a violent kicking around the pub rocks. They had a group of fans called the Finchley Boys, who would quite happy weigh in when they needed to, if fans of other pub rock bands decided to kick off in a Stranglers gig. So for them, punk was an opportunity. They were a kind of angry, snarling band, and punk was angry and snarling. So it finally, they leapt on that opportunity to give them some success. I guess the final question of were they punk, Jet Black was asked that once, are the Stranglers a punk band? And his answer was, I couldn't give a fuck. A nicely punk answer to the question of are you punk? It's probably worth noting from the beginning that they went on to evolve massively from this, their debut album, and the album after it, which was a little bit more of the same. Over lots of albums before Hugh Cornwell left, they had a huge array of musical styles, pop, new wave, goth, straight ahead rock, ballady stuff, their biggest hit, Golden Brown, etc. So this was very, very much a starting point to a whole kind of musical journey for them and their fans. But this was their opening statement, recorded in a week, reflecting their set at the time. It's a driving, snarling beast of a record with melodies aplenty, but with a rhythm section and bass sound that literally hammers you over the head and demands attention. Its problem is its kind of aggressive spat-out lyrics about anger, hatred, bit of humour in there, confrontation, are also about women, and not in a very good way. They are a problem, we might as well acknowledge from the start. They were at the time, and they still are. And that's a shame, because the music is powerful enough to make a statement on its own. It's probably because of the music, not the lyrics, that it appears in NME's top 500 albums, in various 1,000 albums you must hear before you die. Robert Smith, The Cure, describes it as one of his top 5 albums ever. Rob, what did you make of it?
Well, I don't care if they call it punk or not, but I do know that this album was a timely reminder why I never liked, listened to, respected, or put any time into getting to know punk. It's everything that I imagined the genre to be and that scared me off a little bit. Basic, boring songs, poorly executed, stressing lyrical ideas which are ugly at best and problematic at worst. Yeah, there was a lot that I found quite difficult about this album. You mentioned women just then, and that's the one thing we can't avoid talking about, right? Let's hit that nail on the head. I think, I've only been acquainted with this album for less than a week, but there's at least 4 songs that I noticed without even digging deeper, said some very questionable things, which, I forced a laugh, which isn't really appropriate. So, I don't know. It's hard to get over that for a first-time listener, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree totally. For me, I've been on a real journey in the last week over this album because I haven't actually, despite it being on my list of, I love that album, I actually haven't listened to it in years. It was an album I listened to a huge amount when I was 19, 20 and have dipped into my favourite tracks of.
Were you an angry young man at the time?
I think we'll come on to that. But I remember mainly the music, and I still love the music. Listening to it again, the bit I disagree with you, I think musically, the Stranglers always were a cut above punk, not just because they had, a keyboard, but because they knew more than 3 chords, and had various kind of musically trained elements in their lineup. I still love the music, and I want to be able to love the whole album because I think the mixture of that ridiculous bass sound, there are a lot of melodies and hooks that I love on this, and the keyboards that gives a complexity and another layer. I just love that sound. I could listen to that all day, and the tracks where the lyrics aren't a problem, I absolutely adore still. But the journey I've been on, and to be honest, I almost rang you and said, you know what, Rob, I don't think we can do this album. These lyrics are so offensive. They're so terrible. I think we just need to pull the plug. We need to cancel the Stranglers, Rattus Norvegicus. But then I thought, well, no, it's at least worth a conversation. I'm really interested to see what other people think. Can I tell you my journey with the lyrics? It's a fairly long one, but I need to tell you my journey.
Sure.
Okay. So the first thing to say is this is not a standards of the time thing. You know that thing where you look back 30 years and go, oh, well, it's, it was different times then. People had problems with the lyrics of this album from the beginning. NME's Phil McNeil said at the time, I'd have to think long and hard before I could find an album as grossly sexist as this.
In a contemporary review.
Yeah. And in fact, more modern reviews have been kinder because the Stranglers have always played a bit of a dance around this. On the one hand, they say, yeah, we were trying to be controversial because we were trying to get on airplay in the BBC. And in terms of the track Peaches, that certainly worked. It was banned from the BBC and that obviously made it sell more records. So they agree they were trying to be controversial. But at the same time, they've always said, I was going to use the phrase hidden behind, they've always said that actually they were being satirists, that you need to take these lyrics with a pinch of salt. And what they're doing is lampooning the attitudes behind them, not actually saying that these attitudes are right.
So this is the commentary on and a pastiche of toxic masculinity and misogyny and, let's face it, abuse.
Yeah, that's what they would say.
Do you buy that?
Well, that's the journey I've been on. I mean, and to be fair to them, there's, that could be true camp, as their music evolved and they evolved, although they were, as we already said, they were old to start with, there's certainly their subtlety, creativity, their lyrics, there's no hint, as they become older rock pop statesmen, they start to get into talking about politics large and small, and there's no hint of misogyny quite apart from it. So when they say we were satirizing, actually, I believe them, but I think it didn't work, and I think they got it wrong. And I do find these lyrics really offensive to the extent that they're, having thought of this as one of my favourite albums, the journey I've been on is now, there's half this album I will never listen to again.
Yet you put me through it. I would say if it is indeed or even parts of it are meant satirically, it's done very clumsily, and it should have been perhaps more apparent. And I might go as far as to suggest, you said this was their first album, this is based on their live set. If you're playing some pub in South London, shouting some controversial things at some beard up guys probably went a long way.
Yeah.
And it might not actually have been until it was on record and they were achieving their own notoriety and they were being reviewed by the snobby critics down in London and the Enemy and etc. that they maybe realised kind of how far their foot in their mouth was, which is why I find it interesting that this album is so celebrated. I don't want to have an argument about cancel culture. We don't have to cancel this album, but equally we don't need to celebrate it. Why is it still showing up on these lists by Q and all the very old white establishment music critics that are still celebrating? That's the part that I find interesting. And you might, of course, turn the table and say, why is it in our podcast? But I hope Dave's already explained the areas of his ways, and having put me through it, it's only right that I get the chance to talk about it.
No, that's fair enough. No, that's exactly why I almost rung you and said, let's not do this, because it is odd that it is still out there, and hasn't been inverted commas cancelled, and yet the internet is full of...
it doesn't need to be cancelled; it could be ignored. It's not. It's not a case that we need to stop selling it or censor it, or we can accept it as the product it is, and you can buy into those lyrics or as satirically or otherwise if you choose to. What I find troubling, stroke bemusing, is that it is still being held up as a classic album. When I think at this point maybe it should quietly be sliding off those lists and being replaced by a different Stranglers album, or maybe a more appropriate album altogether.
No, I agree, and and indeed, so maybe it should slide off our podcast. But there you go.
So I guess we need to start off by talking about the one song I would have known before I heard the album, which is a problematic moment, but certainly not the most problematic moment.
No.
We're talking, of course, about Peaches, which I guess there's some kind of argument you could make that this is kind of a piece of nod-wink tomfoolery, and I'm sure it was very funny to 13-year-olds.
So my entry into how the heck do I cope with the lyrics of this album was Peaches. The band say it was a Mickey take of that misogynistic attitude, all right? So they're saying they met a slightly up themselves Dutch person who was so full of his kind of masculinity and was always leching and talking about women in that way, and they say that's how the song grew, and they were specifically lampooning that kind of awful objectifying misogyny. The problem with that is it's only a piss take if people think it is. That's the problem. So it made me think of two things. One good, one slightly less cool. So do you remember Right Said Fred and I'm Too Sexy for My Shirt? Remember that?
I do indeed.
Yeah. Now that...
No, but I can't remember it at all, Dave. Do that.
Oh, do you need me to sing it for you? Yeah. I won't do that. So everybody knew, listening to that, doesn't think that they're celebrating... again, it's the same thing. It's about... The Right Said Fred guys saw some models coming out of the agency opposite where they were sitting and just took the mickey out of them. And no one there thinks they're celebrating or actually thinks that the people singing that do think they're massively sexy. And should be models. Everybody knows it's a Mickey take of those people. Another example is Springsteen, Born in the USA.
I was going to say, a very classic example of taken on by Reagan and every
exactly.
Kind of conservative politician since.
You can almost set your clock every 5 years. It's in the headlines over here. Some idiot Republican decides to use it as walk-on music, and Springsteen has to say, "Oh, for goodness' sake, it's not a celebration."
Yeah, and to a certain extent, rocking the free world as well. I think maybe even tub thumping on a more mundane level, and bring it back to British culture.
Sure,
drink a whiskey, drink a lager, drink. There's been a lot of kind of pastiches of lad culture, especially in the 90s, which I don't think were all seriously meant. But,
sure,
people bought into that lifestyle, and there's a lot of those revolving around the kind of frat mentality. I mean, the most pertinent one of all, Fight For Your Right by the Beastie Boys. That was famously a takedown of the bros, the Budweiser drinking frat boys. So famously, there have been many examples of this. This is just another very clumsy one. Perhaps for me, the most tasteless part is the, somewhere better to be, down in the sewer, maybe on a skewer. I'm just like, what are you going on about? This is just lazy. This is just really bad rhyming, really bad. And maybe in their defense, that was the part we're meant to realize it was a pastiche because it was so flagrantly stupid.
Sure. I mean, actually, I think, I quite like the line, as to lots of people, looks like I'm going to be stuck here for the whole summer. What a bummer.
What a bummer. If it had ended on what a bummer, that would have been fine.
Yeah. But then, I mean, actually, there's the bit, I think it's after that, where he sort of, rather than a break, he sort of goes, Now, to me, that's also signalling they're just kind of Mickey taking from this person that's so riddled with lust they can't even get a sentence out, and they're just full of it to the extent that they're ridiculous. So I think you can make an argument for it, but ultimately, if you played this at my famous hipster dad barbecue, I could play Right Said Fred, I could play the Beastie Boys, I could play Chumbawamba. That's a really good example. I think that's bang on the money, Rob. That's exactly the same sort of thing. I could not play this. I couldn't play it.
Are you sure?
I'd have to spend the entire... Yeah, I'm really sure. Because my female friends and my wife would leave, or I'd have to spend the entire... That's the point. It's only... Jokes aren't jokes if you have to explain them, right? That everyone knows that, and I would have to spend the entire barbecue explaining, oh no, by the way, I'm playing this song by the Stranglers, and when he says walking on the beaches looking at the peaches, he doesn't mean that's a good thing. I don't mean that's a good thing. He means that it's a really bad thing that someone has that attitude. Just saying that. Oh, and the next line, that's also another example. You would have to explain it line by line, and once you're in that level, I'm sorry, you might be satirizing, but you failed artistically because you haven't got enough satire in it.
I agree completely with the sentiment. I just think it says a lot about your barbecue guests. I think it's a song that's been so overplayed and it's so ubiquitous in British culture that I feel like most people just wouldn't notice, or if they knew it, they already knew the joke, or they didn't know the joke, or they would wash over them.
That's interesting.
Well,
I tell you what, and it's summer, so I'll do that. And when I have nowhere to live and no friends left, I'll have to come and live in Hong Kong with you. So,
you're right.
Okay, fine. So that's the lyrics. Musically, it's worth it. I mean, I love it musically, and that bass. And did that work for you? Because you were quite scathing about the music as well on the album. But
that was the one song that I did know and have known for many years. In fact, I remember sitting down as a aspiring guitarist, and I think that was a day when my guitar teacher was like, right, now you're going to try the bass, and this is the song you're going to try and play. So I don't think at that age, even then, I quite got it right. But I don't think I had any sense of groove. And I think it's there isn't a complete absence of groove on this record. In fact, I think the bass plays a lot of very bluesy figures, and it's a far more interesting musical concoction overall than the average quote-unquote punk band. And I guess this is definitely JJ's moment. Like, this is his...
Yeah.
This is what would... So, for better or for worse for his reputation, this is what would be left on his headstone, composer of Peaches. But okay. But as I say, as I know the song so well, and because the lyrics are so problematic, and because, as I say, with or without the problematic nature, that's just the vocal delivery really detracts from the performance, and I think that's actually true on a lot of the songs. I was going to ask you, are there two different vocalists on this? Because I feel like half the time the vocals are completely distracting, and just I find it difficult. I'd be just about getting down with the guitar groove, and then someone will start singing, and I was like, I can't engage with this with or without what you're singing. Although when the lyric turns out to be objectionable, it's the moment you go, okay, my choice is justified. But then a few, half of them, I felt the performances were, tolerable.
Yeah, okay, so let's get into that just as an aside. The Stranglers songs, Lennon and McCartney, they always say Stranglers songs written by all four of them. Actually, apparently, the drummer didn't do much writing, apparently. It was Hugh Cornwell, the singing guitarist, Dave Greenfield, the keyboardist, and JJ Brunel, the bassist, with Cornwell and Brunel thought to be taking most of the writing credits. And generally, they sing their own songs, but not always. So JJ Brunel is the least, is probably the songs you're talking about where you can't really understand it so much, and it's more barked and shouty, and the delivery
I can understand it just well, I just can't stand it.
Okay, fair enough. You can't stand it. So he's on Ugly, and he sings Princess of the Street, and he sings London Lady. He apparently wrote To Lose, but didn't sing it because he found it hard to sing and play the bass on that one at the same time. So Hugh Cornwell sings the rest.
So I want to say that he wrote all the problematic ones, but then there's the first song that we need to address, which, I mean, the opening line of the album kind of sets out its stall as a difficult listen, shall we say.
It does. Now, sometimes, so I was going to, that was the next one I was going to move into in terms of my problematic songs. When I was 19, I actually thought this as a song was just a song about being pushed to the limit as a person. So, and not about being pushed to the limit by women, but by people in general, and getting to the point where you're considering violence against anybody, probably in my head a bloke, actually, because it's all, sometimes you've gone too far, sometimes you've got to shut your face, I'm just about to slap you, basically, and it's about that feeling of, oh, I'm so angry with the world, and therefore quite a good way to kick off the album. Like, this is going to be about anger. Fantastic. Now, when you read about it, you then hear the backstory that it is specifically about a row with Hugh Cornwell's girlfriend, where he's thinking, oh, I'm going to, domestic violence is the way forward here. So that gives you problems. And then you go, okay, but that's the backstory of how it was the inspiration, but let's look at the lyrics and see what they actually say. And if you read all the lyrics, nowhere does it mention the person they're being sung to as being female. And that's why I think I used to think it was just about the world in general. The two problematic words, and it's the same word, it's honey.
Yeah.
That's it. If you took honey out of this song, I could listen to it and think what I thought about it. And I may even be able to listen to it and think, well, Hugh Cornwell's taken that feeling, but he's turned it into a more universal. This isn't about domestic violence. This is just about being so angry you're acknowledging you're feeling that way. But he sings it and he means it, because he sings it twice. Honey, this is about, I'm going to commit some violence against my girlfriend. And at that point, therefore, it becomes sort of horrific and horrible. You don't want to listen to it anymore.
It's so funny because I think when I put it on, that first line jumped out at me and I instantly assumed it was about domestic violence, and I have no reason to back that up. Apart from maybe that you'd give me an inkling that this album was difficult, which could have interfered with me, but for some reason, I just imagined that was the scenario. But you're right, that I've got to fight, suggests just, potentially a troubled, beard-up individual. And you could argue calling someone honey, in those days at least, would have been quite a condescending, way to address a bloke.
I've been through that too.
And it's useless asking to stop, and I got a morbid fascination. Again, doesn't declaratively single it out as being a female. But I think taken together, we're left to assume that very much. And the backstory that you have alluded, again, they could have, art takes on different meanings. And I'm really glad that you found, not exactly a positive use for this art, but you found a more constructive interpretation of this song. But I just always assumed it was that way. And I hope that doesn't say something about me. It just, the way it's being sung in a presentation, it sounds nasty.
Yeah. So that just becomes another song that I used to, my memory of it was, that's a great angry song about almost losing it that I now won't be listening to because I haven't cancelled it, but I've silenced it for my own use.
It's a shame as well, because it's probably my favourite song musically.
Okay.
The bass line is basically Peter Gunn, right? It's that blues thing.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of goes into I call it Doors on Beer. I don't care what the guy said. No, the way he's playing modal bits, and also the use of the synth. They're both using these modal. I guess it's Dorian. It's very, very reminiscent of Break On Through, actually, what they're doing.
Sure.
Which I can kind of appreciate the noodliness of it, and I think it's one of the moments where that synth and guitar noodliness works best.
Mm-hmm.
But now we've decided that we know it's for sure. Is it beyond reasonable doubt?
I think it's beyond reasonable doubt.
So despite that, we're parking it.
We're parking it. So then my next problematic song is Princess of the Streets.
Yes.
So I've got to say again, my 19-year-old self, I just thought this was a Mickey take of the blues. It's probably my least favourite music.
I thought it was a really poor, lazy pastiche to fill the pub rock set out, but
okay, well, probably both. It's probably both those things. They were probably doing it.
I might be in a more cynical stage in my life than you were when you first heard it.
Yeah. But they're probably like, A, we're Mickey taking the blues, and B, we can stretch this one out for at least 20 minutes if we run out of set. So fantastic. It's the one I remember skipping even when I was 19, because once you've listened to it a few times, it's blues and it's not great blues, so it's not very musically interesting. But lyrically, the way it's sung by J.J. Brunel, it sounds like he's taking the mickey a little bit. And
that's it. His delivery is always so overblown and always so intolerable, always so much of a caricature.
Sure.
And that's really what put me off. But I mean, this is one more reason you could argue that there's this element of artifice satirism there.
Yeah, thinking it was a Mickey take the blues, I also thought it was a Mickey take of the person singing the blues. So, a lot of it's fairly benign. I've just, she's gone and left me. Oh, I miss her. Da, da, da. Obviously, the real red hot awful line is "what a piece of meat." And genuinely, I kid you not, when I was 19, I heard that as taking the mickey out of the person singing it, because they've gone, oh, I'm so heartbroken, I love this person, oh, they're the best thing ever. And it's that we know people like that, don't we? Who go, oh, I'm so in love. And actually it just turns out that they just fancied them massively, and saw them as just an objective physical thing. Right. So they're saying, oh, it's an emotional soul thing. And actually, as soon as the next person they find physically attractive comes in the room, they're like, well, hey, no, I'm in love with them now. Because I wasn't really, although I was heartbroken over there, I wasn't really in love with them at all. I had no emotional or mental connection with them. I was just lusting after them. So that's what I thought it was lampooning in a pretty, very quick way. That kind of idiot person we all know that does think of whoever they're attracted to, male or female, as a piece of meat, but dresses it up as love and emotion, etc. That's what I thought. Having sort of gone through the prism of Peaches and sometimes, I'm now just like, yeah, it doesn't come across, and you'd have to explain it to too many people, and even explain it to you now, having had a week of thinking about how to explain it, and it's taken me about 30 seconds to do so. So once you're in that world of having to explain satire, it's not really satire anymore, is it? And it just comes across as really, really horrible, misogynistic kind of alienation of women, does it not?
It's the classic playground defence. I was joking, miss. I was joking.
Yeah.
I'm worried that you've missed one in your problematic hunt. London Lady?
Oh, no, don't worry. London Lady's on the problem list. Just not quite in order. London Lady actually has the same issues for me in that I can make an argument for it, and then there's just a couple of lines, or I mean, in the case of sometimes it's just one word that just tips it all over to the other side of the scales. So
would one of those words be sausage?
Yes, of course it would. And the other would be Mersey Tunnel. So on the face of it, it's almost, you're going to laugh at this, but it's kind of almost Zappa-esque, the lyrics to this song. Okay. It's kind of, I'm fine with the taking the mickey out of a certain type of vain up themselves London journalist. The Dingwalls thing. And when you see mirrors, you get the shivers. I'm okay with all of that. They're taking the mickey out of that person.
I don't know. I think,
okay.
I feel a sense of disquietude when I hear women described flippantly as stupid in songs from earlier eras. Obviously, Stupid Girl by the Stones and Stupid Girl by Neil Young. Both of them I find very difficult. So when the third line of this was "You're so stupid," I instantly...
Sure.
Again, I mean, he's already said "little lady," so there's no chance we know he's talking about a contemporary. I instantly assumed this was probably someone he's in a romantic relationship with or lusting after. Or there's some reason that, he's very frustrated about this person for reasons that are probably not entirely justified. So that was just like an antenna when I heard that, like, uh-oh. Which again is a shame because this one gets a bit of a groove on. You've got a kind of like New York Dolls, ragged, post-rock and roll thing. And then the vocals come in and it's just like, ooh, I don't want to hear any more of this. And it's a very painful 2.5 minutes ahead.
No, I agree. I agree with you musically. I think it's a real shame because I love it musically. I think it's a real proper punk pop song and that really works. Yeah, if I was Zappa, which I'm not, obviously, I would say that part of equality is that people can be called stupid whether they're male, female or whatever. And I'm now thinking through whether I agree with that or not. I hadn't picked up on the little lady bit. You're right. And that is really derogatory and horrible. So the thing that really just makes you go, ew, is that awful making love to the Mersey Tunnel with a sausage. It's just that kind of typical derogatory, well, she was a certain type of person that slept around anyway and saying it in a really derogatory way. That's just the bit where
it burns his ears. It burns his ears.
Yeah.
He's suffering.
Yeah, just from her talking. Yeah.
What do you make of the line "Plastic's real when you're real sick," which is repeated 8 times?
Lots. Plastic's real when you're real sick. I think they're saying that she's a very facile plastic person, and even plastic is real when you're as sick as she is. I don't struggle with that one so much as some of the, as you've now said, the little lady's stupid lines and the Mersey Tunnel line.
I mean, the line "Why did you lay me?" is certainly one that she's probably been debating for the rest of her life.
Indeed. So there we are. You've got Peaches, Prince of the Street, London Lady Sometimes, which I now don't everybody want to listen to again. And then there's Ugly. And that's also on the problem list for me.
I should bloody well hope so.
Yeah. So it's a ramble, and so it's quite difficult to make head or sense of it, And on one level, you can say, well, it's a ramble about beauty, aesthetics, attraction, wealth, power, and strangling someone because they laced your coffee with acid. It quotes Ozymandias from Percy Shelley, a poem that explores the fate of history and the rouges of time. And so, and there's a great line. It's only the children of the fucking wealthy that turn out to be good looking. And that's quite cool. And an ugly fart attracts a good looking chick if he's got money. I'm all right with that. Although, the word chick is not great, but as a kind of encapsulation of their feeling.
Come on.
Go on.
Hair rock, it's fine. Yeah, but then he has to bring race into it.
Yeah, well, and then that's the real struggle. Is that line again? It's different for Jews somehow, and it's that bit that made me go, "What? Where are you?" And I've therefore Googled, Stranglers, anti-Semitic, etc., and nothing comes up about that line. It's really confusing. Is he saying that it's because it's in and around an ugly fart attracts a good-looking chick if he's got money? And is he saying that that's not true for Jewish people, or that is even more true for Jewish people? And even so, why are Jewish people getting singled out? The whole thing leaves a very nasty taste in your mouth, and you go, do you know what? I'm just going to put that in the list of I won't listen to that either because I can't make head or tail of it and I think it's probably offensive.
Yeah. I mean, musically, I wasn't exactly a fan of it either. It's a kind of dirgy mess. And yeah, I found the title was very befitting of the art.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so
what are we left with? If you were to
exactly. So
if you were to conceivably keep listening to this album for the rest of your life, how many minutes of music are left, and what's on your EP?
Not many. So I do feel guilty of recommending you an album of which now I would only have 4 songs that I would listen to, which is Goodbye Toulouse, Hanging Around, Get a Grip on Yourself, and Down in the Sewer. So, Goodbye Toulouse.
Was this just about JJ going to maybe on a very small scale tour, or maybe it's going on a bad family holiday and just not having a very good time?
No, it's a reference to Nostradamus' prediction that Toulouse was going to explode in some kind of Armageddon type thing, and so it's just a riff on assuming that's happened. Hence the big explosion at the end. So it's just I
really thought he just had a bad kebab on holiday and was just like,
so long Toulouse. So and as that, I kind of quite cool. I mean, it's probably offensive. Is it offensive to the good people of Toulouse? I don't know, but I kind of thought it was quite a nice song with a good melody and some nice harmonies, and I enjoy it.
Yeah, I wasn't super bowled over. I guess Hanging Around is the one we're actually left with, which I think was probably a single, right? Like that.
Yeah.
That works for me as a bit of a slacker anthem. It's got a chorus. It works. I think, that would definitely be in my top 3 on the album. And it's the only one of the top 3 that I'm, now allowed to listen to. So,
sure.
It had a tinge of kind of early 70s, kind of like Alice Cooper, Stoogie, kind of like, that kind of swaggery proto-punk thing, which I can take.
I love Hanging Around. I can listen to Hanging Around. Well, I have to now because it's what's left. But I think it's a brilliant track.
Or you could just burn the CD.
I could do, but it's a picture of the people and places in London where they used to hang around, and I just that kind of picture of people just doing nothing with nothing in their lives. But I just love the energy of the chorus, and I don't know whether it's just me, but I always expect it mentally or musically. I expect it. There's these long-held chord progression with these kind of long-held notes. It goes da da da, and I expect it to do a 4th one before the chorus comes in, and he comes in much quicker than you think. He comes in on the 4th one as it resolves, and I find the energy of that just constant. I can listen to that constantly. I just think that's a masterstroke. And I saw in doing this, I saw a live them doing it live in '77 in some pub in London, and that came across really well too. Really love that. Really love Get a Grip on Yourself as well. Great picture.
Really?
Of kind of pre-fame rock and roll. Yeah.
I mean, it's just another whiny. Again, maybe in the context of what we've just discussed and how they're complaining about everything, but this just seemed even more trite that after taking on such horrible subject matter, you're now essentially just like a petulant little child whining that you're not making loads of money for playing music. Like you're entitled to somehow be rich and famous for churning out this kind of misogynistic shit. So no, I didn't like that at all. And I thought musically it was a complete dirge. And it's got a saxophone on, which is completely inappropriate.
Which is great.
I did not enjoy that one at all.
Given this is supposed to be a sort of punk classic, I think it's brilliant. It's got a saxophone on it. Although I get because he says the worst crime I ever did was play some rock and roll. No, Hugh Cornwell, the worst crime you ever did was write the lyrics to Peaches. Is the answer, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, but the other one I did like of the trio was the closing medley. I think, well, at least until they started singing, I think the first 90 seconds were thrilling. They've got one musical idea, and then it comes in with what is actually a really quite cool riff. It's got this kind of twanging, slow, almost rockabilly thing to it. And then I guess there's 3 or 4 different stages. It's odd that it's called a medley because it seems like definitely some stages repeat. So it's not so much a medley as a song with more than 2 musical ideas in. And yeah, I did again find the vocals grating at time, but then the cool riff comes back and I'm happy. And so yeah, I think musically, Sometimes and This were the ones that I took away most. And if this one is the one I'm allowed to listen to, I probably won't out of solidarity with everybody that they've offended, including myself. But yeah, I feel like this is the most the album has to say musically. Lyrically, I'm not so sure about being down in a sewer and being a rat and all that stuff. There's probably a story you want to tell me.
Yeah, so Down in the Sewer, I love it, obviously. As is obvious to you, I came to this album after listening to prog rock a lot, so to find a prog punk suite was excellent, with little sections to it. Musically, I think it's both compelling, energetic, and got a complexity to it, which I like. The story of being down in the sewer, it comes from a 1975 BBC drama called The Survivors, where it's a post-apocalyptic world where 1 in 5,000 people survive some kind of virus or something, and it's about how those survivors survive. And in one episode, London Calling, sorry, not London Calling, that's the Clash album, Lights of London, they tried to get to London, and the only way into London is through a sewer. And that was the inspiration of it. With the Stranglers, the Down in the Sewer thing, I kind of, there's a justification-ish for the album about everything that's gone before is just about being in a sewer. We're all down in the sewer, really, and you can dress yourself up with all sorts of pretensions, but we're all just, ultimately trying to survive in the sewer that is the world. I guess that's where I think that's what they're pointing to. So, of the 4 remaining songs we can listen to, this is by far my favourite, and it plays out at live. I've heard it on various live albums and things, and it's an absolute, sort of monumental piece.
So let's just run down the mini EP of non
offensive
songs on Rattus Norvegicus, which is an offensive title already. So we've got Goodbye Toulouse, which is lampooning.
No, just blowing up Toulouse.
The good people of France. But okay, great.
Yeah.
Then we've got Hanging Around, which is a celebration of being a
slacker loser.
Jobless slacker. Yeah, okay, fine. Then we've got Get a Grip on Yourself, which is basically complaining about not getting famous.
Yeah, pre-fame rock and roll. Yeah.
Yeah, and then Down in the Sewer about being a rat and surviving.
Yeah. That's what we got. Well,
we've dwelled enough on this bile of lyrical mediocrity and hatred and all things problematic. I think it's time to talk about what this album means to us. And I did wonder if, we've spoken about my impending midlife crisis woes. I wondered if you recommended this as some kind of antidote, because if so, it was utterly ill-founded.
No, I recommended this because my memory of it was as a driving, energy-fueled burst of anger and a bit of music complexity, which I thought you would enjoy. And as it turns out, I still find the energy behind it brilliant. It's not quite as musically complex as I remember, and I appreciate that. And as we've rehearsed hugely, there's just too many lyrical problems for more than half the album.
For what it's worth, I was engaged by some of the music. I did find a lot of it a thankless dirge, and I feel like, the super loud bass and the whiny synth was a bit much. But I definitely heard some interesting ideas from the guitarist, and I could see that I can imagine this band going on to bigger and better things, and it's a really interesting thought experiment if we could play out what I would have thought this album without all the reasons to hate it, which we've discussed.
Sure.
So did this album play any significant role in your life apart from, soothing your angry young man period?
Yeah, it did. It was my gateway drug out of prog. This is how I escaped prog.
I think every album you've discussed in this show has been your gateway out of prog so far.
That's actually true. It was one of my gateway albums out of prog. You see, the problem is I'm desperate to play you prog, but I can't do that because, no one will listen. So, it was one of my entry routes out of prog. And it was my entry I had it on cassette, into the Stranglers. And as I say, I think the thing about the Stranglers is they did evolve massively through through the 80s, really. I mean, they had 10 albums with Hugh Cornwall, Feline, Black and White, Oral Sculpture, La Folie, that's just a few of them. And they're all...
You've got them all?
I have got them all. And what I like about a band like that is you can follow the journey and you can go, oh, well, they did try this style next and they tried this style next, and some with success, some with less success. But it's certainly not that kind of, you bought one Oasis album, you've got them all. They are very, very distinct musical entries into a library that are quite nice to enjoy and watch the development of.
I'm going to interrupt on behalf of Oasis fans the world over and say you're completely mistaken. And now, I was flirting with it anyway, but listeners, in a future episode, we're doing Be Here Now. We're going to go there.
I love a bit of Oasis. Can't get enough of it.
It's interesting you say talking about their different stages of their evolution, because whilst I'm not familiar with this album or any of their heyday albums, I did have a brief brush with some of their early noughties material.
Okay.
So, funny story, you may or may not be aware they did an album called Norfolk Coast.
Yes, I was going to mention Norfolk Coast.
It was written about this crazy occurrence where they found like a mini stone hedge off the coast of Hunstanton in North Norfolk. Okay. And the reason I know that is that's because it's quite close to where I grew up. And at a certain point in my early journalistic career, I had the unenviable job of interviewing JJ Burnell for a very awkward 30 minutes on the phone, primarily about the fact they were playing some Norfolk stately home. I think they were sharing a bill with Simply Red or someone equally ridiculous. But yeah, for the interview, I obviously said, I need to hear some music. I always did this when I interviewed people. I'd ask their press team to send me free CDs, primarily so I could sell them on. For whatever reason, I wasn't able to sell the albums they sent me, which was the newest album at the time, Sweet 16, and indeed Norfolk Coast, because that was the content of my article at the point. I don't really remember Norfolk Coast, but I do remember really enjoying Sweet 16. So maybe you should check that one out, Dave.
Okay, that's a good recommendation. And, that's interesting because after the 10 albums, and the last one being 10 that Hugh Cornwall was on, he famously left and has famously never spoken to the band since, despite all that success they had together. And again, did the famous, Roger Waters, Pink Floyd, and Roger Hodgson Supertramp thing, which we already discussed, which is he was the primary songwriter. He left, and everybody carried following the Stranglers and going to their gigs, and not at all going to his gigs or buying his albums. But I would say his solo albums, there's 3 in a row in the mid-90s, early 2000s, Guilty, Hi-Fi and Wired. Thoughtful pop rock. I like them quite a lot. I'd recommend those. The Stranglers, they could have, what you do when Hugh Cornwall leaves, you sort of dine out on your back catalogue for quite a while, including his live. But had this sort of renaissance, and the one I know about but have never heard of is Norfolk Coast, which is largely thought to be their kind of brilliant swan song, and the one to check out their later stuff. And, I'm not surprised JJ Brunel was grumpy. It must be awful for these people, and especially Hugh Cornwall. You listen to any interviews, you look into him now, and he must have just been asked the question, why did you leave the Stranglers and what do you feel about that now? Every single time he meets a journalist for anything.
I mean, on the one hand, I obviously feel outraged I didn't ask JJ about all the lyrics we've just discussed. Bear in mind, this was the pre-Spotify age and I wasn't familiar with them. But pretty much from what I recall, he wasn't unkind. He was fulfilling the obligations of playing a Norfolk County Hall in what was probably his 50s, which is giving a long but not super extensive interview to a local paper and talking primarily about Norfolk Coast, which I think he did enjoy talking about because that was clearly an album he was proud of.
Yeah.
So, Dave, this is normally the part of the show where we do further listening and you tell me which 2 or 3 records I should go off and listen to by the Stranglers. But to be quite honest, notwithstanding JJ's relative charm on the phone 15 odd years ago, I've got no real interest in exploring this problematic band any further. Is there any music related to this that I should go and hear?
Well, that would be a tragedy. I don't think this album should put you off the Stranglers as a band because, yes, the lyrics are this deeply offensive, but so they evolve both musically and lyrically to a world where I think you might quite like it. The obvious parallels for other bands, as Buzzcocks, The Clash, their contemporaries, the people I've always found them most similar to is Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds.
Oh.
Because Nick Cave, obviously also grew out with the Birthday Party, that kind of sort of angry punk scene type thing, and then evolved into a much richer and kind of wider musical diversification. And I think the Stranglers, for me, the Stranglers have always been a slightly angrier, perhaps not quite as good Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. But so if you're a Stranglers fan and you've never explored Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, you really need to do that. That's what I'd say.
Well, Dave, you are on. I'll show you Divisive Oasis and you can show me Nick Cave.
Sounds good. So, that was an odd one because I recommended to my brother an album that I don't feel I can recommend to anybody anymore, other than for what arguably
At least
I
it was
think...
me, huh?
At least it was you and our millions of podcast listeners. Rob, what am I going to be listening to next?
So I need a shower after that. Okay. Well, I think this exercise has only highlighted the painful absence of any female musicians in this series to date. So
Sure.
I'm going to recommend a record which I really fell in love with, as so many other hundreds of thousands of people did during the pandemic. Let's do Fetch the Bolt Cutters by Fiona Apple.
Okay, looking forward to it. Thanks for listening, everybody.